She was the mafia boss's wife, elegant, graceful, and kind. But that night a group of arrogant men crossed every limit. They laughed, they insulted her, and one even poured whiskey on her head. And then, the door opened. The mafia boss walked in, his eyes cold, his jaw tight. He wasn't just angry, he was destroyed inside. Stay till the end. What happens next will leave you speechless and teach America a heartwarming lesson about respect, love, and justice. And if you like this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us bring more heart-touching and powerful stories every day. The city below shimmered like 1,000 golden dreams. The streets buzzed faintly with the hum of night traffic. But up here, on the rooftop, it felt like another world. Mickelson opened the car door for Olivia, his eyes soft with admiration as she stepped out. Her red dress glowed against the dim streetlight. Elegant, graceful, almost unreal. It clung to her curves gently, flowing with every move she made, as if even the wind bowed to her beauty. For once, his heart wasn't thinking of power, enemies, or control. He was just a man tonight, her husband, her protector, her admirer. When Olivia's hand slipped into his, Mickelson's usually cold heart warmed with something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Peace. "Finally," she whispered, smiling up at him. "A night that's ours." He smiled faintly, brushing his thumb over her fingers. "No business, no calls, just you." The bar stood high above the city, its rooftop glowing with tiny lights that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Inside, soft jazz played in the background. The scent of roses and aged whiskey filled the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of Olivia's perfume. People turned to look when they entered. They didn't know who Mickelson truly was, thankfully. To them, he was just another handsome man escorting a beautiful woman. His black suit fit perfectly, his eyes sharp but calm, and the hint of power in his movements made heads turn. But for Olivia, none of that mattered. She only saw the man who once sat by her hospital bed for nights when she was sick. The man who learned to smile again after years of living in shadows. Tonight, she wanted to remind him what peace felt like. They sat at the corner table, overlooking the glowing skyline. Mickelson reached for the bottle of wine, pouring it slowly as the candlelight flickered between them. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. Olivia blushed. "You always say that." "Because it's always true," he replied. She laughed softly, the sound light and musical. He could have listened to it forever. Around them, the laughter of other couples filled the air, blending with the clinking of glasses and the soft rhythm of the music. For a rare moment, Mickelson let himself relax. He wasn't the feared mafia boss tonight. He was just a man sitting across from the woman he adored. The night breeze brushed through Olivia's hair, carrying a whisper of jasmine and warmth. She leaned closer, resting her chin on her hand. "Do you ever wonder what life would be like if we weren't who we are?" He smirked slightly. "Probably quieter, maybe safer, but definitely emptier." Her eyes softened. "You always know what to say." He leaned forward, brushing a kiss across her knuckles. "Because I mean it." In that moment, it felt like the city itself stood still to watch them. Two souls from different worlds who somehow found peace in each other. But peace, for people like them, was always fragile. And somewhere, across the bar, a group of drunken men had already noticed the woman in red and whispered words that would soon turn this peaceful night into something unforgettable. Before Olivia came into Mickelson's life, his world was a battlefield. Every day filled with lies, enemies, and blood-stained loyalty. He trusted no one, smiled at no one, and loved nothing. His hands carried both power and pain, and his heart had long forgotten what warmth felt like. But then she appeared, not with diamonds or fame, but with kindness so quiet it felt like a whisper breaking through chaos. Olivia didn't see a mafia boss. She saw a broken man behind the armor, and that terrified Mickelson more than bullets ever could. She met him one winter night at a charity event she was forced to attend by her friend. He was standing alone by the balcony, smoking, his expression cold as steel. The rumors about him made people step away. But Olivia, she stepped closer. She handed him a cup of tea instead of fear. "Try this," she had said softly. "It's chamomile. It helps people sleep when their mind doesn't rest." He had stared at her, shocked. No one had ever dared talk to him like that. No trembling, no begging, no flattery, just care. That moment stayed with him. And weeks later, when he found out who she was, the woman who ran a small art center for underprivileged kids, he couldn't forget her. Their worlds collided again and again. She painted peace. He ruled darkness. But slowly her laughter became the only thing that calmed the storm in him. When he had nightmares, it was her voice that brought him back. When rage filled his veins, it was her hand on his chest that steadied his heartbeat. Even his most ruthless men noticed the change. The man who once barked orders with fire in his eyes now smiled when she entered the room. They started whispering behind his back, not out of disrespect, but disbelief. "Olivia," they'd say quietly, "the woman who tamed the lion." One night when Mickelson came home bruised and bleeding after a fight with a rival gang, she didn't scream. She didn't scold. She simply knelt beside him, cleaned his wounds, and whispered, "You don't have to fight every battle alone." He looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't seen in years: mercy. From that moment, she became his peace. Even the cruelest men in the city began to fear hurting her, not because of Mickelson's wrath, but because they knew she represented something sacred to him. She was the line he would never let anyone cross. She was his calm, his reason, his redemption. Olivia never asked him to change. She only showed him what life could be if he did. And slowly Mickelson realized that true power wasn't in control or fear. It was in love that disarmed him completely. Now, sitting across from her in the rooftop bar, watching her eyes shimmer under candlelight, he thought, "This woman saved my soul without even trying." He reached for her hand under the table, his thumb brushing her skin lightly. "You have no idea what you mean to me," he murmured. She smiled, her gaze tender. "I don't need to. I can see it in your eyes." The world around them faded, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the jazz, all of it. For that brief second, it was just them. Two souls that once lived in opposite worlds, but somehow met halfway in love. But while love gave Mickelson peace, fate was preparing to test that peace in the most brutal way possible. Because at the next table, arrogance was about to meet power, and ignorance was about to meet its lesson. As Olivia's laughter floated through the rooftop air, a group of drunk men started whispering. One leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "Who does she think she is? Wearing red like she owns the place." The night was meant to be perfect. Soft music, golden lights, and Olivia's laughter weaving through the air like a melody he never wanted to end. Mickelson leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. The way she smiled, the way her red dress shimmered under the candlelight. She was everything good that life had ever offered him. He reached across the table, brushing his fingers lightly over hers. "You have that look again," he said softly. "What look?" she asked, pretending not to know. "The one that makes me forget who I am." Olivia laughed quietly, the sound gentle and real. She didn't notice the group of men at the far table watching her. They had been drinking heavily, their laughter rough, echoing over the music. A few glances turned into stares, and one stare lasted far too long. The man in a gray jacket leaned back, swirling his drink lazily. His eyes, glazed with alcohol, roamed over Olivia shamelessly. His friends laughed at some crude joke, but he wasn't listening. He was too busy watching the woman in red, the one sitting beside a man he had no idea could destroy him with a single word. Mickelson noticed it. At first, he ignored it. He was used to attention. Olivia's beauty always drew eyes. But this man's gaze wasn't admiration. It was disrespect, filthy and unashamed. Mickelson's jaw tightened slightly. The flicker of danger in his eyes was faint, but it was there. Olivia, ever gentle, felt his mood shift. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," he said, forcing a smile. "Just enjoying the view." But his hand tightened around his glass, the veins on his wrists standing out. The drunk men's laughter grew louder. One of them slapped the table, shouting something about women in red dresses. Another roared with laughter, spilling his drink. Olivia turned slightly, her eyes calm, but her body tensed. She wasn't naive. She could feel the unwanted attention crawling across her skin. Still, she tried to keep the peace. "Ignore them," she whispered, her hand resting gently on Mickelson's. He nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. For her, he would try. He had promised her no violence tonight. But the man in gray didn't stop. He leaned toward his friends and said something low, something that made them burst out laughing again. Olivia caught only a few words. "Thinks she's royalty," and the laughter that followed stabbed the silence between her and Mickelson. Mickelson's eyes darkened. His instincts screamed to stand, to break that man's smirk, to remind him who he was talking about. But Olivia's hand stayed on his. "Please," she whispered again. "Don't. Not tonight." Her voice, so soft and filled with love, held him still. For a moment, the waiter came by, nervous, glancing between the two tables. He knew the danger in those eyes. The quiet man in black wasn't just another guest. He had heard stories whispered in the city's darkest corners. Mickelson, the man whose name alone could make the cruelest men tremble. But tonight, he was silent. For her. Only for her. The man in gray chuckled, leaning to his friends again. "I bet her guy's too scared to say anything," he mocked. "Just another rich fool showing off." Olivia froze, her fingers tightening around Mickelson's. He slowly turned his head, eyes meeting the drunk man's for the first time. The look was enough to make anyone's blood run cold. The music kept playing, but the mood had changed. Every flicker of the candlelight seemed sharper. Every sound of laughter turned into tension. Even Olivia could feel it. Something was about to happen. Her heart raced. She knew her husband's patience had limits, and this man was pushing every one of them. She tried to breathe, tried to calm him, but the fire had already begun to burn in Mickelson's eyes. He looked at her once more, his expression softening for just a second. "You deserve better than this noise," he murmured. She smiled faintly, but the fear in her eyes was clear. "I only need you," she whispered. For a fleeting moment, peace returned, fragile, trembling, but it wouldn't last. Because across the room, the man in gray lifted his glass of whiskey again, a cruel grin forming on his lips. And in the next heartbeat, something reckless, something unforgivable was about to happen. The man's laughter grew louder. And then, with one careless, drunken flick of his wrist, the whiskey in his glass spilled, flying through the air. Olivia gasped as the golden liquid splashed against her red dress. Olivia's red dress wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of love, a quiet promise she had made to herself, that no matter how dark Mickelson's world became, she would bring color to it. The dress shimmered softly, hugging her figure with elegance, not arrogance. It wasn't loud, it wasn't bold, it was graceful, designed to make him smile, not the world. She had chosen it carefully that evening. Mickelson rarely took her out in public, not because he didn't want to, but because danger followed him like a shadow. Yet tonight he wanted to give her something normal, a night of laughter, of love, of peace. When she stepped out of the dressing room hours earlier, Mickelson had gone completely silent. He had seen women in diamonds and silk before, but never one who glowed like that. "You look unreal," he had whispered. And she had blushed, biting her lip. "You like it?" "I'd fight the whole world for you in that dress," he'd said with quiet sincerity. Now, under the golden rooftop lights, that same dress caught the eyes of the wrong men. At a nearby table, the group of loud, half-drunk men couldn't stop staring. Their laughter grew crueler, their smirks more visible. They didn't see a woman's beauty. They saw something to mock, to disturb, to feed their own fragile egos. "She's asking for it, wearing that," One of them muttered under his breath, swirling his whiskey glass lazily. Another laughed. Her boyfriend looks too calm, probably weak. Their words floated through the air like poison, words meant to bruise. Mickelson heard it. He didn't move, didn't speak, but Olivia felt it, that shift in his presence. His hand, which moments ago held hers softly, now rested flat on the table, knuckles slightly white. His breathing deepened. Olivia leaned in, her voice calm but trembling. "Mick, please, don't." He looked into her eyes, and for a heartbeat the world went quiet. He could have stood up and ended it right there, but her voice, her faith, kept him still. "For you," he murmured again, "only for you." But the men didn't stop. The man in gray, the boldest of them, smirked as he raised his glass toward Olivia. "To the lady in red," he sneered, his tone dripping with mock respect. His friends burst out laughing. Olivia's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She turned away, pretending not to hear, but inside she felt her chest tighten. The way they looked at her wasn't admiration. It was cruelty. And what hurt her most wasn't the words. It was that she could feel Mickelson's pain through his silence. He had promised her no trouble tonight, but she knew. Every cruel word was slicing at him like a knife. She whispered softly, trying to distract him. "Remember our first night at the beach?" He smiled faintly. "When you made me promise not to kill anyone that week?" She chuckled. "Yes, that one." Her laughter was soft, but her eyes shimmered with worry. She could see his patience thinning, like glass beginning to crack under pressure. Around them, people noticed the tension. Some whispered, some pretended not to see. The waiters moved quietly, afraid to approach their table. The air felt heavier with every passing second. Olivia looked down at her red dress, her fingers brushing against the smooth silk. It was meant to bring peace to the night, not fire. And yet, it had become the reason the peace was about to shatter. Mickelson finally looked up, his eyes cold and quiet. The kind of quiet that came before a storm. His voice was low, dangerous, almost tender. "They don't deserve to breathe the same air you do." Olivia's heart clenched. "Then don't waste your breath on them," she whispered. But fate had already made its move. The man in gray laughed again, leaning over his table with drunken arrogance. He lifted his glass high, pretending to toast. "To beauty without manners," he mocked loudly, and before anyone could react, he threw the whiskey. The golden liquid arced through the air in slow motion. Olivia gasped, her body freezing as the cold splash hit her chest, soaking through the red silk. The laughter from their table exploded like gunfire. Mickelson didn't move for 2 seconds. Then his chair screeched backward and the storm inside him broke loose. The bar fell silent. Olivia sat frozen, her red dress dripping with whiskey. And Mickelson, calm, composed Mickelson, stood up with eyes that no longer held peace. The whiskey stain clung to Olivia's red dress like a cruel reminder of humiliation. She sat frozen, her breath trembling, trying to keep her composure as the laughter from the next table sliced through the air like glass. The man who threw the drink leaned back in his chair, grinning as if he had done something amusing, not despicable. Beside her, Mickelson's silence was terrifying. His fingers rested against the table, motionless. His eyes, once soft and full of love, now looked like 2 dark storms waiting to break. The air around him changed. Even the music in the bar seemed to falter. But before he could move, another voice rose, sharp, mocking. The blond man at the table smirked and leaned closer to his friends. His words weren't meant for her to hear, but they carried easily in the heavy silence. "Who does she think she is?" he sneered. "Dressed like that, walking in here like a queen." His friend chuckled, his voice cruel. "Maybe she's looking for attention." Olivia's fingers trembled against the edge of the table. She stared down at her lap, at the red silk now ruined by the golden stain. For a second, shame burned through her, not because of what they said, but because she could feel Mickelson's fury rising beside her like fire. He exhaled slowly, trying to control it. He had learned this from her. Control restraint, peace. For her sake, he fought every instinct screaming to destroy the men who dared insult his wife. "Mick," Olivia whispered softly, sensing the storm within him. He didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his knuckles white. She touched his hand gently, her voice trembling. "Please, not tonight." He turned to her slowly, his gaze softening for only her. "For you," he said quietly. "I'll stay calm. But for them—" His words trailed off, heavy and unfinished, like a warning the world should have listened to. She squeezed his hand tighter, her eyes pleading. "You promised me peace tonight." He nodded, his voice like gravel. "And I gave it to you, until they decided to destroy it." The blond man laughed again, tapping his glass against the table. "Look, she's pretending not to hear," he said cruelly. "Typical, acting classy to hide what she really is." His friends howled with laughter, the sound echoing through the bar. A few people turned their heads, whispering, sensing danger. The waiter froze mid-step, his eyes darting nervously between the two tables. He had seen men die for less. Mickelson's hand slowly moved from the table to his lap, his body rigid, controlled, like a predator waiting for the exact second to strike. He looked at Olivia again. She was trembling, tears beginning to form in her eyes, but still she whispered, "Let it go." For her, he had walked away from battles. For her, he had turned his empire toward peace. But this was different. This was not a war of business or power. This was disrespect to the woman who had given him a soul. The blond man kept going, his drunken voice echoing across the rooftop. "She walks in here like she owns the place. Probably some sugar baby with a rich guy." He laughed again, proud of his cruelty. Mickelson's entire body stilled. His fingers flexed once, his eyes narrowing just enough to make the blond man's laughter falter. Something in the air changed. It thickened, darker, heavier. Olivia reached out, her soft voice the only barrier between love and destruction. "Mickelson, please look at me." He turned his head slowly. Her eyes glistened with tears, and in that second, the world went quiet. He took a long breath. "You are the only thing keeping me human right now?" Her lips trembled, but she smiled faintly. "Then stay human, for me." He nodded once, but deep inside, the fire was already lit. The men behind them continued laughing, oblivious to the danger they had just awakened. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know that every breath they took now was borrowed time. And as the night deepened, one more insult would shatter the last thread of Mickelson's control, leading to a moment that would silence the entire bar. Olivia's voice trembled as she tried to calm him, but the blond man leaned in again, louder this time. "She's not even worth the drink I spilled." The sound of a glass shattering broke the air. The room was thick with tension, every pair of eyes pretending not to notice what was unfolding. The laughter from the men's table grew louder, sharper, like knives hidden behind smiles. But Olivia, she sat still, graceful as ever, her trembling heart hidden behind calm eyes. She heard every word, every whisper, every cruel laugh, but she didn't flinch. Her fingers, delicate and steady, reached across the table until they brushed against Mickelson's rough knuckles. His hand was ice-cold, his muscles locked in silent fury. She squeezed it gently, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Don't," she whispered, "not tonight." For a moment, the fire in his eyes softened. He looked at her, really looked at her, her calm face glowing in the dim light, her red dress glimmering like courage itself. He swallowed hard and forced the tension in his jaw to fade. "For you," he murmured. His voice was heavy, but his smile, though faint, was real. Olivia's eyes shimmered as she nodded. "That's enough for me." She picked up her napkin and quietly dabbed at the whiskey stain on her dress. Her movements were slow, almost peaceful, even though the air around her crackled with danger. Her grace didn't just calm Mickelson, it silenced the storm in him. Across the room, people began whispering, realizing who she was, the Olivia, the woman who'd tamed the Mafia king. the woman who had turned a man feared by thousands into someone capable of kindness. One of the waiters, nervous and pale, stepped forward to offer help, but Olivia smiled gently and shook her head. "It's fine," she said softly. "Accidents happen." Her words carried weight. Even the blond man who had mocked her earlier paused for a second, caught off guard by her poise. He had expected tears, anger, maybe even screams, but instead, she met humiliation with quiet dignity. That silence was powerful. It said more than 1,000 threats. Mickelson's chest rose and fell slowly. He kept his hand over hers, grounding himself in her calm. "You shouldn't have to take this," he muttered under his breath. She smiled faintly. "And you shouldn't have to fight every battle. Sometimes walking away is the victory." For a brief shining moment he believed her. Her voice was soft but firm, like light cutting through darkness. "Mickelson," she whispered, "I fell in love with the man you are, not the power you carry. Let's go home." He looked at her for a long time. In her eyes he saw peace, the kind of peace he'd been searching for his entire life. He nodded finally, rising to his feet. "Let's go." The entire bar watched as he offered her his hand, and she took it gracefully. Together, they began to walk toward the exit. The crowd parted silently, respectful. But as they reached the door, one final voice broke the calm, sharp, mocking, cruel. "Yeah, walk away, pretty boy, hiding behind your woman now?" Mickelson stopped. Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. The bar went silent. He turned his head slightly, his eyes dark as midnight. The calm was gone. The man who once ruled the underworld stood still for one last second before the glass beside him shattered under his grip. The sound echoed like thunder. Everyone knew it wasn't over. The Mafia King's fury had returned. The men's laughter died in their throats as Mickelson took one slow step toward them. The night that had begun with golden laughter was now standing on the edge of disaster. The bar's soft music could no longer drown the tension humming through the air. At the far table, the group of drunken men had turned restless, careless from too much alcohol, blinded by arrogance. "Let's make her notice us," the blond one sneered, his grin crooked and mean. He grabbed his half-full glass of whiskey, amber liquid sloshing over his fingers. His friends chuckled nervously, whispering warnings that fell on deaf ears. "Come on, man, don't," one muttered. "You don't know who that guy is." But the drunk man, bold and stupid, just laughed. "Yeah? What's he gonna do? Stare me to death?" The moment he stood up, chairs scraped, and all the nearby conversations died mid-sentence. Everyone could sense it. The wrong kind of energy, the kind that made the air feel too thin to breathe. Olivia didn't notice him at first. She was talking quietly to Mickelson, still trying to keep him calm. Her eyes sparkled faintly under the candlelight, her voice as gentle as rain on glass. But then she saw it. The reflection of a man behind her, a glass of whiskey tilting. Her body stiffened. "Mickelson," she whispered, barely turning. The Mafia boss glanced up and his world stopped. The blond man smirked, his words dripping with venom. "Hey, sweetheart, you look a little too clean for this place." Then, without hesitation, he tilted his glass and let the whiskey fly. The golden liquid splashed across Olivia's red dress, staining it like liquid fire. Gasps erupted across the bar. A woman dropped her drink. Someone whispered a prayer. Olivia froze, shocked, breathless. The chill of the alcohol seeped into her skin, but worse than that was the humiliation. She blinked back tears, not from pain, but from disbelief. Her red dress, the one she'd worn for him, now clung to her like a cruel joke. The blond man laughed loudly. "Guess red looks better with whiskey, huh?" His friends joined in, the sound ugly and hollow. But behind Olivia, Mickelson rose from his chair. Slowly, silently. The sound of his chair legs scraping against the floor made every drunk heart freeze. He didn't speak, he didn't shout. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, one hand trembling, not from fear but from fury he could barely contain. Olivia turned to him, her voice breaking. "Please, not here," she whispered. But he didn't move his eyes from the man. Every ounce of restraint he'd learned, every promise he'd made to her, was cracking like thin ice under a storm. The bar fell into total silence. Even the music stopped. Someone must have turned it off, terrified of what was coming. The blond man stepped back, suddenly realizing something he hadn't before. The quiet around him wasn't normal, it was fear. And when he met Mickelson's eyes, the truth hit him hard. He had just poured whiskey on the Mafia Boss's wife. "Man, it was a joke," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean—" But Mickelson took one slow step forward. And another. And another. The look in his eyes wasn't rage anymore. It was something colder, quieter, lethal. Olivia stood quickly, gripping his arm. "Mickelson, please," she whispered again, her voice trembling like glass ready to break. He looked down at her hand, and then up at her face. For 1 second, her eyes, the same eyes that had always softened his heart, held him still. Then came the laughter again. Nervous, foolish laughter from the men behind the blonde. That was the last sound before chaos began. The bar went silent as Mickelson's patience shattered. The Mafia Boss, the man the city feared, was about to remind everyone what it meant to cross his queen. It happened in the blink of an eye. A second ago, the air was tight with tension. Now it exploded in silence. The drunk man, still grinning, stumbled too close to the table where Olivia and Mickelson sat. The glass in his hand tilted, golden whiskey swirling like liquid sunlight, before crashing forward, right onto her. The splash hit Olivia's red dress with a soft but merciless sound. In an instant, the delicate silk clung to her body, shimmering under the bar's dim lights. The golden stains spread like fire, crawling across the crimson fabric, turning beauty into something cruel. Gasps rippled through the bar. Someone dropped their drink. The sound of breaking glass echoed faintly, but nothing compared to the pounding of Mickelson's heart. The man chuckled, low, mocking, unforgivable. "Oops," he said, his grin twisting. "Didn't see you there." His friends burst out laughing, loud and careless, their voices like knives cutting through the still air. Olivia's cheeks flushed, not from anger but from the sting of humiliation. She sat frozen, her hand gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her lips parted but no words came out. The whiskey dripped from her dress to the floor, one slow drop at a time, each one echoing in Mickelson's chest like thunder. Mickelson's jaw clenched, his entire body going still. Stillness was dangerous for a man like him. It meant the storm was building. He looked at Olivia first. Her eyes glimmered with unshed tears, but even now she tried to stay calm. She reached for a napkin, trembling but graceful, trying to wipe away the stain that refused to disappear. "Mickelson," she whispered under her breath, "please don't." But her words were like sparks on gasoline, because at that moment, he saw the man smirk again. He saw the flicker of pride in his drunk, foolish eyes, and Mickelson's heart snapped. He rose slowly from his chair, his black suit glinting under the amber lights. The room went completely still. Even the air dared not move. The blond man looked up, trying to sound tough. "What? You got a problem, buddy?" Mickelson didn't answer. He didn't need to. Every step he took toward the man sounded like a countdown to destruction. Olivia's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's not worth it." He looked down at her hand, the same hand that had once pulled him from the darkest corners of his life. For a moment, he tried to breathe. He tried to listen. But then, the man laughed again. "That's right, boss. Keep your dog on a leash," he sneered. A sound tore through the room, chairs scraping, glass rattling, hearts stopping. It wasn't Mickelson's roar. It was the energy of his fury, silent but fierce, like the air before lightning strikes. He took one step closer, his shadow swallowing the man's. "Say that again," Mickelson said softly, so softly that it chilled the blood of everyone nearby. The man blinked, his confidence crumbling, his hands trembled. I didn't mean—" But it was too late. The moment the whiskey touched Olivia's red dress, something inside Mickelson burned awake, the side of him he'd promised her he'd buried. Olivia whispered his name again, her voice cracking. "Mickelson, please." He turned slightly, his eyes softening at her voice, but only for a second. Because behind her, the man chuckled one last time, trying to look brave. That was the last mistake he'd ever make that night. The bar would remember the sound of that first punch forever. Because when the Mafia Boss moved, the world went silent. It was as if time itself forgot how to move. The moment the whiskey touched Olivia's dress, laughter died, music stopped, and even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. The bar went dead silent. Not a chair creaked. Not a word dared to escape anyone's lips. Olivia sat motionless, her chest rising and falling in small, fragile breaths. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. The golden whiskey still glistened against the red silk of her dress, dripping slowly to the marble floor like drops of molten shame. Her hand trembled slightly as she tried to brush it away. But her eyes, they were wide, shimmering with disbelief and hurt. Across from her, Mickelson didn't move. His fingers rested flat on the table, knuckles pale, the veins in his wrist standing out like carved marble. His head tilted just enough to fix his gaze on the blond man still holding the empty glass. Those eyes, once warm and full of devotion when they looked at Olivia, had gone cold. Not angry, not furious, just cold. It was the kind of silence that screamed louder than words. A silence that made every heartbeat in the room sound like a drum. The bartender froze behind the counter, glass in hand, afraid to blink. A couple at the far end of the room quietly pushed their chairs back, ready to run if things went wrong. But Olivia, she could feel it. The storm was right there, just beneath Mickelson's calm face. "Mick," she whispered softly, her voice cracking like fragile glass. He didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the man. His breath was steady, too steady. That scared her even more than if he had shouted. She reached for his hand across the table. "Mickelson, please look at me." He did, slowly, and when their eyes met, her heart broke. Because she saw it, the part of him she thought she had healed. The part that belonged to the Mafia King. The part that lived and breathed violence. "Mickelson," she whispered again. "Don't!" Her voice was desperate, pleading. "He's not worth what you'll lose tonight." But Mickelson barely heard her. The pounding in his chest was louder than her words. His mind played the moment again, the splash, her gasp, the laughter. He had sworn to protect her from every monster in his world, and tonight the monster was standing right in front of him. The man, still too drunk to understand the danger, shrugged and tried to laugh it off. "Hey man, relax, it was just a joke." That word, joke, snapped something deep inside Mickelson. He stood up, his chair scraping the floor with a low growl. The sound sliced through the silence like a warning bell. The entire bar flinched. Olivia rose too, clutching his arm, whispering frantically, "Please, let's go, we can leave." But he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he leaned close to her ear and said, in a voice only she could hear, "No one touches my wife and walks away laughing." The words were low, controlled, but the promise in them was terrifying. The blond man tried to take a step back, but his legs betrayed him. His friends suddenly looked pale, realizing who this man really was. The Mafia Boss. The silence thickened again, heavier than before. Even Olivia's heartbeats seemed to echo in her ears. Mickelson's eyes never left the man's face. His lips curled just slightly, not into a smile, but into something darker. The moment before violence is the quietest one of all, and this was that moment. The entire bar could feel it, the spark, the shift, the danger. Then, finally, Mickelson took one slow step forward, and the silence shattered. The storm Mickelson had been holding inside was about to explode, and when it did, no one, not even Olivia, could stop him. Mickelson stood slowly, so slowly that it felt like the air itself thickened with every inch he rose. His tall frame towered over the table, the low lights casting a long, sharp shadow that stretched across the polished floor. For one quiet moment, he said nothing, no words, no movements, just silence and danger. Then he did something that broke Olivia's heart a little more. He reached for his coat, the same black coat that smelled faintly of his cologne and warmth, and without a word, he draped it gently over her trembling shoulders. His fingers brushed her collarbone for just a second, soft and protective. She looked up at him, tears still trembling in her lashes. His eyes met hers, and what she saw in them wasn't just anger, it was heartbreak. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. "Apologize to my wife." The drunk man froze. His friends went silent, eyes darting between them like frightened animals. No one breathed. Then the blond man smirked, his foolish pride refusing to surrender. "Wife?" he said mockingly, taking a slow sip from another glass. "She should watch where she's sitting." The words hit the air like poison. Olivia flinched, clutching the coat tighter around her. Mickelson didn't blink. His jaw tightened, veins standing out on his neck. The calm in his eyes began to crack, revealing the storm underneath. "Say that again," he said softly, so soft that the man had to lean forward to hear it. It wasn't a request, it was a warning. The blond man laughed, pretending to be brave. "What? It's the truth, isn't it?" That laugh, the sound of it, was the final spark. Mickelson's hand clenched into a fist, knuckles whitening. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied into something deadly calm. The entire bar could feel it, like a shift in the atmosphere before thunder. "Mickelson," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. "Please don't. Not here. For me." He looked at her again, the way he always did when she was the only thing keeping him from darkness. His eyes softened, just for her. "I gave him a chance," he murmured quietly. "That was mercy." The blond man, still smirking, raised his voice. "Oh, so the little lady needs her man to fight her battles." His friends chuckled nervously, but their laughter didn't last long. Because in the next breath, Mickelson took one step forward, and the room changed. Every head turned. Every sound died. The bartender dropped a glass behind the counter and didn't even move to pick it up. Mickelson's shadow fell over the blond man like night swallowing daylight. He leaned slightly forward, voice low and dangerous. "You think you're brave?" he said softly. "Try saying that again." The man tried to laugh, but his voice broke halfway through. His eyes darted toward the door, toward his friends, but no one dared to move. Olivia's hand slipped from the edge of the table, her breath shallow. She knew this side of him. The man who didn't need guns, didn't need guards. His silence was the weapon. For years, the city had whispered his name in fear, and now this fool had dragged that legend into a bar filled with witnesses. Mickelson's face was unreadable, his calm so terrifying it made the walls feel smaller. The man's smirk finally faltered. "Hey, look, man, Mickelson's hand shot forward, grabbing the man's collar before he could finish. The sound of fabric tearing filled the silence. The man's drink fell, shattering against the floor, whiskey pooling beneath them like liquid gold under firelight. The Mafia Boss leaned close enough for the man to smell danger. His whisper cut through the air like a blade. "You spilled whiskey on my wife. You disrespected her. Now, you'll show her what respect means." He released him suddenly, shoving him back just enough to make the man stumble. The room remained frozen in that breathless pause, the pause before chaos. Olivia's hand went to her chest, her voice trembling. "Mickelson, please, for me, just stop!" But the storm behind his eyes had already begun to break. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to unleash the fury of a man who loved deeper than anyone and protected harder than any king. In that single moment, everyone in the room finally understood why the city feared him. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a man who would burn the world if it meant keeping his queen untouched. The apology never came. Instead, the man laughed again, and that was the last sound before the first punch shattered the night. That was the last straw. Mickelson's eyes turned to steel. He moved so fast no one even saw the first hit. The drunk's glass shattered against the wall, spraying shards across the floor. Another man, bigger, louder, stepped forward. Before he could open his mouth, Mickelson's fist landed on his jaw with a sound that silenced the room. The man dropped instantly. "Anyone else?" Mickelson growled, his voice low and deadly. The crowd backed away. Chairs scraped, glasses stopped clinking. The bar felt like a frozen world. One man tried to lunge from behind. Mickelson caught his arm, twisted, and slammed him against the counter so hard that bottles rattled and fell. The bartender didn't move. He just whispered under his breath, "That's Mickelson Hayes, the Mafia Boss." The name spread like wildfire. Every drunk smirk vanished. Every mocking laugh died. Now, all eyes turned to Olivia, the woman standing quietly in the red dress, whiskey dripping off her sleeves. Her calmness beside such fury made everyone shiver. Mickelson straightened his coat, grabbed a napkin, and tossed it onto the trembling man on the floor. "Clean up your mess," he said coldly. "And next time, think before you touch what's mine." No one dared to breathe. He turned to Olivia, his expression softening instantly. "Let's go, love," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. And as they walked out, hand in hand, the bar stayed frozen in stunned silence, haunted by the moment they realized the quiet man in the sky-blue suit was not just rich. He ruled the night. She didn't scream, she didn't stop him. She just stood there, frozen, her red dress clinging to her, her eyes shimmering under the dim lights. Tears fell silently down her cheeks, not because she feared him, but because she knew him too well. She knew how much he hated violence, how he had spent years trying to bury that part of himself. And yet tonight, for her, he had let the darkness out again. Mickelson's hands were still trembling, not from anger, but from guilt. He glanced at her, saw the tears, and his chest tightened like a fist. "Olivia," he whispered. His voice cracked for the first time. She shook her head gently. "No," she said softly, "you don't have to say anything." He took a step closer, his eyes full of pain. "I promised I'd never hurt anyone again." She placed her hand on his heart, feeling it pound beneath his suit. "You didn't hurt anyone," she whispered. "You protected me, but I just wish the world didn't force you to be this man." For a moment, the room felt like it disappeared. No broken glass, no crowd, no whispers. Just them, two souls, standing between love and chaos. He brushed her tears with his thumb, his voice barely audible. "I'd destroy the whole world before I let it hurt you." Olivia smiled faintly through her tears. "I know," she said, her voice trembling, "and that's why I cry. Because I love the man you hide, not the one they fear." He closed his eyes and held her, right there in the middle of that silent bar. And in that fragile embrace, the Mafia boss became just a man, broken, protective, and deeply in love. The bar manager rushed forward, his face pale, hands shaking so badly that the keys on his belt rattled. "Mr. Mickelson, sir, please. No trouble here, please," he stammered, almost tripping over his own words. The entire room froze. The music stopped. Even the flickering candle flames seemed to shrink back in fear. It was like the air had turned to stone. That name, Mickelson, echoed through the bar like thunder rolling through a quiet valley. People whispered it under their breath, their eyes wide. The Mafia boss, the man who ruled the city's underworld without ever needing to raise his voice. The drunk men who had mocked Olivia now stood like statues. Their pride melted away, replaced by a terror they had never known. One of them dropped his glass. It shattered against the floor, echoing like a scream. The manager swallowed hard and bowed his head slightly, trying to calm the storm that was Mickelson. "Sir, I had no idea it was your wife," he whispered. No one dared to breathe too loud. Mickelson's cold gaze scanned the room. Every face lowered, every heartbeat seemed to stop. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence alone was a warning. He turned slightly toward Olivia, his voice deep but soft. "Let's go," he said. "You don't belong in this kind of place." Olivia nodded, still trembling, still holding the coat he had placed over her shoulders. The way he said you don't belong here wasn't arrogance. It was protection. He wanted to take her far from this ugliness. As they walked past the bar counter, every head turned away. The men who had laughed earlier now looked like children caught in a nightmare. One even fell to his knees, whispering, I didn't know, sir, I swear." Mickelson didn't answer. He simply paused at the door, glanced back once, a look colder than winter, and then led his wife out. The doors closed behind them with a soft click, but the silence they left behind was deafening. The manager exhaled, shaking from head to toe. He looked at the mess, the broken glass, the spilled whiskey, the men still frozen in fear. Then he whispered to himself, voice trembling. They had no idea who they just touched. And with that, the legend of Mickelson grew even darker that night. A single act of disrespect had turned a quiet evening into a story no one in that bar would ever forget. The men who had been laughing minutes ago were now shaking like leaves in a storm. Their arrogance had drained away, replaced by a sick, crawling terror that filled the room. One of them tried to stand, but his knees buckled beneath him. Another pressed his bloodied hand to his nose, eyes wide with disbelief. "We didn't know, sir," one cried. His voice cracked with fear. "We didn't know she was your wife, please. We didn't mean—" Mickelson turned his head slowly toward them. The silence before his words was heavier than any threat. His blue eyes, usually calm and distant, burned with an icy fire that made even the lights seem dimmer. "That's the problem," he said coldly. "You didn't know, and you thought that gave you permission to humiliate her." The words hit harder than his fists had. The men lowered their heads, trembling like children scolded by fate itself. Olivia stood behind him, her red dress still stained with whiskey, her heart breaking as she watched. She could feel the anger radiating from him, the kind that came not from pride, but from love. He wasn't just defending her honor. He was defending the woman who had taught him peace, and they had shattered that peace in front of her. One of the men dared to look up, tears in his eyes. "Please, we'll do anything, just don't—" Mickelson stepped forward, his shoes crunching against broken glass. His voice dropped to a near whisper, cold enough to chill blood. "Anything? Then remember this night. Remember the taste of fear. And remember, the woman you disrespected was worth more than all your cheap whiskey combined." The men nodded desperately, eyes wide, lips trembling. No one moved, no one breathed. Mickelson's control was terrifying, not in violence, but in the power of his restraint. He could have crushed them. Instead, he walked away. He turned to Olivia, his expression softening just a little. "Let's go," he said quietly. "I've already wasted enough breath on cowards." Olivia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she followed him. As they walked out, the crowd parted like waves, every soul avoiding their gaze. Even the bartender whispered a silent prayer under his breath. The door closed behind them with a low echo, leaving behind a room full of pale faces and trembling hearts. For those men, that night would be a scar, a memory of what happens when cruelty meets the wrong kind of love. And outside, under the velvet sky, Mickelson took a deep breath that trembled with rage and pain. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. They would never forget her. They would never forget him. The air was thick with fear and silence. Every man in that bar had stepped back, afraid to even breathe. Only Olivia moved. She rose slowly from her chair, her red dress still damp and stained with whiskey. The silk clung to her, shimmering faintly under the trembling lights. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, a few strands sticking to her damp cheeks. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, were fierce, proud, and full of something the room had forgotten existed. Grace. Mickelson stood before her, breathing hard, chest rising and falling like waves in a storm. His fists were still clenched, his jaw tight, the fire in his eyes refusing to fade. She took a slow step toward him, the sound of her heels echoing through the silent bar. Every gaze turned toward her. No one dared to speak. "Enough," she said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room like a bell ringing in the dark. She placed her hand gently on his arm, her fingers trembling against the tense muscles beneath his sleeve. And that one touch, it was like thunder meeting the sea, calming, dissolving, softening everything it touched. Mickelson froze. He looked at her, and in a heartbeat, all the rage, all the fury that burned in his chest, melted away. Her eyes met his, full of tears but strong. "I'm okay," she whispered. "You don't have to fight for me anymore. You already did, and that's enough." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. He wanted to speak, but no words came out. He could only stare at her, the woman who could silence his darkness with a single look. Around them, the room remained utterly still. No one dared to move. It wasn't fear that kept them frozen. It was awe. Awe for the woman who stood, soaked in whiskey and humiliation, yet radiated more strength and dignity than any of them had ever seen. Mickelson's shoulders dropped. He closed his eyes, taking in a long breath. Her touch was enough to remind him who he was when she looked at him, with love, not fear. "Let's go home," she whispered. And in that soft voice, he found the peace he had lost. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening under the dim lights. Without another glance at the trembling cowards, he took her hand gently and turned toward the exit. As they walked away, Olivia glanced once over her shoulder, not in anger, but in quiet forgiveness. a forgiveness that burned more deeply than any revenge ever could. And in that moment, everyone who saw her knew they hadn't just disrespected the wife of a mafia boss. They had insulted a queen. Olivia turned slowly toward the frightened men. Her red dress clung to her like fire and velvet, the whiskey stains glistening faintly under the lights. Her eyes, still glimmering with tears, held something sharper than anger. They held truth. The men, bruised and breathless, stared at her as if she were something holy and dangerous all at once. Her voice broke the silence, soft, calm, but filled with unshakable strength. "You don't have to fear him," she said. "You should fear what kind of men you've become." Her words sliced through the air like a blade of light. Even the bartender froze mid-motion, his hands trembling around a glass. The sound of her voice was gentle, but it carried the weight of conscience, the kind that left men breathless. "You laughed at a woman," she continued, her voice trembling slightly but never breaking. "You thought it was funny to humiliate someone just because you thought no one would protect her." She took a step closer, her heels clicking softly on the floor. "What if I was alone tonight?" she whispered. "What if someone weaker was in my place? Would you still laugh then?" The room felt smaller now, suffocating under the truth of her words. The drunken courage in those men had vanished completely, replaced by the crushing shame that no one could hide from. One man's lip quivered. He looked away, staring at the floor. Another swallowed hard, his face red, eyes wet. Mickelson stood behind her, silent but proud. This was why he loved her. She didn't need guns or threats. Her heart, her voice, her dignity, they were stronger than anything he had ever used to win a war. Olivia's tone softened, though her eyes remained fierce. "You can fix a broken glass," she said softly, "but not a broken soul. Tonight you didn't just disrespect me, you showed the world who you truly are." She looked around the bar, at every face that had laughed, every stranger who had stayed silent. And one by one their heads bowed in shame. No one could look at her. No one dared. Then she turned back to Mickelson, her voice breaking only slightly as she whispered, "Let's go home." He looked at her, his queen, his heart, and nodded slowly. Without another word, he took her hand and led her out through the heavy silence. Behind them, the bar was a graveyard of regret. The men who had mocked her now sat with lowered eyes, haunted not by fear of the mafia boss, but by the echo of her voice, reminding them of the men they had become. And in that echo, there was a lesson that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Mickelson stepped closer, his voice deep and low. "If you ever mock or harm another woman again," he said, "you won't have to fear me. You'll have to live with the guilt of who you are." Then he took Olivia's hand. "We're leaving." In the car, silence filled the air. Mickelson looked at her, guilt swimming in his eyes. "I lost control again." She smiled faintly. "You didn't lose control, Mick. You protected your wife." He held her hand. "You make me want to be better, Olivia." Back at their mansion, Mickelson wrapped her in a blanket, gently wiping the whiskey stains from her arm. She touched his cheek. "You don't have to fight the world for me." He whispered, "I'd burn the world for you if someone disrespected you again." She smiled softly. "Then let's rebuild it with love instead." Weeks later, those men returned to the same bar, but this time they were sober. They apologized to the staff, to the women around them, and even started a small campaign about respect and dignity. They never forgot the night they mocked a stranger who turned out to be a mafia boss's wife. And they never forgot her words. Because in the end, it wasn't Mickelson's fists that changed them. It was Olivia's grace. Respect every woman not because she belongs to someone powerful, but because she belongs to herself. True strength isn't in power or revenge, it's in love, respect, and self-control.